We are going to go over throwing bigger, throwing with 2 pounds. Also, we're going to talk about shaping and also throw a couple of other things. And like I said at the end, if there's any request items you'd like me to throw, let me know and we can go over them as well. So, for the most part, throwing bigger is going to be the same as throwing with any other amount of clay, except there is more clay. It will often feel like you need more strength and that you're putting more effort into it just because it is going to be more clay to move around. So also with that being said, I will typically do all of my steps a lot slower and try to do my steps all a little bit better than I might otherwise. I know I said in our first class that it doesn't really matter if your steps are super perfect or even all that good, that it's going to be more beneficial to just kind of do the best you can and move on. Once we have more clay, if you have a step, like for example, if you know that your piece isn't super centered, it's going to be a lot more unruly and hard to manage once you have more clay. And so I think that it's often going to be a lot easier each step as you go if you can get the step as good as you possibly can. In terms of making your hockey puck, the width of your hockey puck is going to determine the width of the bottom of your piece. So if you're trying to make something that's tall and skinny, you could start with kind of a taller, skinnier hockey puck. If you want to make something really wide, you could start with a hockey puck that is significantly wider. So you can kind of think about that before you start to open up your piece. Since I'm going to be making something tall, I will make this a little bit more narrow. Something like this. So now I'm going to enter into my piece. If you've been using your thumbs for this step, you'll often find that your thumbs are going to be too short to make it the whole way to the bottom. So this is often where I'll either use one thumb and one pointer finger, or you could use another combination that feels like a better fit. Come in and open my floor. I'm going to compress the floor. And then before I start pulling the walls, because I'm going to make this into a tall cylinder, the top thing on my mind is going to be making sure that this clay doesn't start to flare out. Because once it starts to flare out, it's going to be harder to keep it in the cylinder shape. And so we want to start thinking about that before we do any pulls. So a couple things you can do to counteract that flare are, one of them I'll be doing kind of as we go, is called collaring. There's a couple different types of collaring. I'll talk more about them with the shaping, but one type of collaring is you can get your hands really wet and then just use both of your hands to kind of squeeze in on the piece. And this will help keep it all a little bit tighter in so that it doesn't flare out. The other thing that I'll do is when I'm doing my pulls, instead of thinking about pulling straight up, I'm going to think about taking the clay and pulling it in towards the middle, almost to make like a cone shape. Because often what will happen is if it's starting to flare out, but you're pulling in kind of like this, or you think you're pulling in like this, it will correct to a straighter wall, essentially. So I'll start off doing my one-handed pull. Because we've got so much more clay, this is already pretty tall in comparison to only using 1 pound. This was about the final height of my 1-pound pieces. This is really where we're gonna have to start doing two-handed pulls. So for two-handed pulls, as a refresher, I do this, I'll show you kind of what I will describe, and then also I'll show you what I do. And this is something that is like largely personal preference, so you can just see kind of what makes the most sense for you. So I am going to take my hands in finger guns, and I'm gonna connect my thumbs, and then you use some combination of your pointer fingers to squeeze and then move up along your piece. And this, I know with the one-handed pulls, we do it with our left hand on the left side. This we'll be wanting to do on the right side of our piece. What I do is slightly different. I'll have my left hand as a finger gun and touch that to my right hand. And then I will take my right hand, and instead of having this one in a finger gun, I will take my thumb and connect it to my pointer finger, kind of like this. And then I will use the side of my thumb and pointer finger on the outside. I just find that it feels a little bit more comfortable, more stable for me. So you can kind of play around with that. If you have specific questions about that later, let me know. We'll go in. And at first, so with my arms, at first, I am able to brace my right arm on my leg, and I can still use this for stability. There will come a point that I'm not gonna be able to reach my leg anymore. And once that happens, I'm gonna really make sure I'm tucking my elbows into my waist or into my core so that I'm not moving around. I think also with throwing bigger, it's nice to do everything a little bit slower than you would and just be a little bit more intentional. Also, don't forget to breathe while you're pulling the walls. I personally hold my breath every time. Like maybe that's why I'm always so winded during all of our demos. So even though I'm planning to throw a vase, I'm always just gonna start with a cylinder. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first being that the clay is going to be much more structurally sound having walls that are just straight up and down. They're supported, they're not wanting to like flop down, versus once we start to get some curves in here, it's not going to be as structurally sound and it might want to collapse a little bit more. So by keeping it in this position as long as we can will help lessen the chance that things will collapse. Things will happen along the way, but the least amount of time you can keep it in kind of its final shape is often going to be a little bit better. It also just makes it so that your clay is all kind of in its designated place, height-wise, thickness-wise, before you make anything else happen. There may come a point, if you're throwing something really tall, that you're not going to be able to connect your hands anymore. Once my piece is longer than the length of my hand, I'm not going to be able to touch my thumb to my hand. And at this point, it's kind of like a mind game stability-wise, that you're like just really trying to keep your hands still and stable because you don't have the ability to brace them on each other. Something I'm also not sure if I've mentioned so far is when I pull my walls, especially once I get something that is bigger or just something that has already had a couple pulls done, is that I am not using a consistent pressure the entire way that I'm pulling. So typically I will squeeze harder down at the bottom because this is often where there's some extra thickness, and I'll squeeze down and then try to slowly bring some of this up. And as I can feel that the walls are thinner, as I get higher, I will have much less pressure because I don't want to make them thinner, if that makes sense.
Are your hands on the inside and outside at the same height? Or are you?
That's a great question.
Is there like one under the other?
I usually will have, let me see. I feel like this is one of the things that's like, I know the answer, but only in my body, not my mind.
Yeah. My dad's side hand should be lower.
I think that my outside hand is slightly higher, but that could also be personal preference. I think that it's pretty slight. Like, I think my fingers are meeting like here-ish. So it's not like a super huge difference. But you can kind of mess around with that and see like what makes the most sense, see what feels comfortable. I think that other people throw with their hands a little bit more drastically separated. When I'm throwing taller things that I know I'm going to make more narrow, at a certain point, I am going to make sure I get all the water out from the inside and then not add any more water to the inside of my piece because I'm not going to be able to get it out if my hand can't fit down there. There are tools that you can use, but in general, that's like a nice rule. To kind of counteract that, what I'll do is I'll either just add water just to the outside, or I'll put water on my hand and then put my hand inside, so then it's like enough to be still slippery and lubricated, but not enough that it's pooling at the bottom. So at this point, I'll do a little bit more of my collaring, kind of make sure this is all in a nice straight cylinder. And now I'll start to think a little bit about shaping. So the shape that I'm going for is I'm gonna do a vase that's like a little bit wider at the top, goes in at the neck, then goes out at the shoulders and kind of comes down. The bottom will be more addressed during trimming, so that's often not quite as important, especially because we already picked the width of our hockey puck to start, so this is a decent place to be. I'm going to start with where I want the shoulder of my vase to be. I'm gonna have that be maybe like here. I'm gonna get my hand wet, and I'm gonna take my left hand, and I am going to press in with my left hand and then kind of move my hand down to stretch out the clay. So I'll start pressing in and then pressing down. And depending on the shape, since I want mine wider up here and then more narrow down here, I'm going to put more pressure up here and then kind of gradually have less pressure as I go down. And I'll do this a couple passes. You always want to start with the wide spots as opposed to, I guess what I mean by that is like you'd want to start at the shoulder instead of being like, okay, I know that I want it to be this wide, so I'm going to start at the bottom and then just kind of like stretch it out. And the reason for that is because the clay is going to have a limit on how far it can stretch. So if you are determining that wide spot first, you are going to be able to proportionately keep the rest of your piece in line, as opposed to being like, okay, I got really wide and now I'm up here and my piece is like already ripped or something along those lines. And you might get to a point you're like, ooh, okay, this wasn't as wide as I wanted to go, but now I can kind of like adjust my expectations for the rest of the shape. So now that I've got this shoulder, I am going to come in and do the neck. There are, like I said, a couple different types of collaring. So the type that I will use on the neck is kind of like a strangling situation. So I'm gonna take my hands kind of like this, like you're going up to choke somebody, and I'm just going to kind of wrap my hands around and press in. And then I'll do this at the top too, so that I can show you that later on. So now I've got this a little bit more narrow. I'm gonna do it again. So now I've got something kind of like this. Because I've made the neck thinner, the shoulder now looks more pronounced in contrast. So now, as my kind of last piece, or I guess I'll also talk about the other point, or the other type of collaring that I probably wouldn't do on this piece because it's not narrow enough, but this type of collaring will be used if you ever make something that's so narrow that this is going to be kind of too, how do I explain this? It's like your hands are kind of like getting in the way, it's too bulky. So there's kind of like this very like dainty type of collaring called 6-point collaring, and you use your thumb and your middle finger, and then also the knuckle on your pointer finger. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points, and you can press all of them in. And this is how you can get things that are like really, really skinny bottlenecks and still have it be like a really light kind of touch. So now for my final little shaping thing, I'm just going to flare out the top. This is something that I think most people have already done, either intentionally or accidentally, just kind of like flaring something out. So I'm just gonna kind of take my left hand and kind of pull the clay out a little bit. Give us something kind of like this. At this point, if I wanted to have the top be different, or make any other adjustments, you can also totally do that. Does anybody have any questions about this?
You made that look so easy. You talk about compressing the top, and I don't know if you did when you were doing like a bowl. Do you always, right at the end, you took the sponge and...
Oh, and like go like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I never talk about that, but I do always do that. Yeah, I'll usually press the rim on my piece. I'll kind of have 2 of my fingers just kind of pinching together, and then I'll either press down with a sponge or my pointer finger on another hand. This will help kind of like even it out, but also, yeah, just compress the clay. Let's take this off and then we'll do this. This one's not gonna make it. I typically don't trim my pieces.
Oh.
No. Mostly due to laziness. And so I try to throw in a way that I just don't have to trim. This one, I don't think will make the cut, but that's okay.
Because you don't like the shape after you trimmed it, or why you want to make the cut?
Oh, good question. So, this one I would like more likely have to trim, because at a certain point of taking too much wet clay off, it can start to get like kind of dicey. Like I've really shaved down things, and it will get so narrow that your piece will want to like topple over. And so then it gets kind of sketchy, and then you're often left with nothing. Actually, that's so sad. That's something that I also like to do just periodically, and I think can be hard for people who are new, is to cut open your piece and see what the walls look like. And then you can kind of decide how your wall thickness journey is going. So this is mine. And this is pretty even. This is honestly not bad at all. It's like a little bit thicker down at the bottom, which as we know isn't the end of the world and is typically how it is. But this is pretty even. Okay, should I do, maybe I'll do a plate first, and then I'll do a bubble plate. For these ones, for the plate I just got a pound of clay just so that it's faster. For the bubble plate, that one might be like a pound and a half. If I was making an actual bubble plate, I'd probably use more, but. So to make a plate, you're really gonna be thinking about what that initial hockey puck is going to look like. Or not initial hockey puck, but I guess the starting hockey puck. And usually once I have my piece centered, I am just going to make this hockey puck as wide and as flat as I can. And you want to make sure that your piece is centered before going into this, because once a piece is in a shape like this is going to be much harder to center if it's not already centered. So now that this is decently wide, instead of really opening or compressing the floor, I am going to just kind of make a little indent and then kind of pull back. It's gonna be so much more subtle just because there's not a lot of depth that we're working with. I think one of the things that's hard about throwing plates, or can be hard, is just taking the time to get the bottom flat. It will often have like some of these ridges kind of going on, and it usually will just take a little bit of patience and kind of going over it a bunch of times to make sure that it's flat. So let's say I've gotten this as flat as I want it. I'll really want to make sure that I come in and compress the floor a bunch of times. I think clay doesn't like to be in wide, flat shapes a lot of the time. And so things that are wide and flat are sometimes more likely to crack, especially plates. So this is where you really want to make sure that everything is compressed. So now we've got a little bit of extra clay over on the edge. We can do like a little tiny one-handed pull. We can do like a bowl plate situation. Do something like this. If you wanted more of an actual plate, you could kind of flare this out. You want to be careful that you don't flare it out too much, because at a certain point it will want to start to flop. It's also good to note that once you have cut off your plate, when you're setting it down on anything like on the table, you want to make sure you set it down gently, because if you set it down really hard, it will often, maybe this one won't, it will often want to have part of it flop down. Sometimes you'll be able to kind of come in and scoop it back out, and it won't be a big deal, but sometimes you won't, so just be mindful. Anybody have any questions about that?
On the transfer, on those big wide flat ones, is it best to like use metal scraper to kind of help you?
Ooh, that's a great question. So depending how big it is, I'll also take a look at just the bat situation, but depending how big it is, you can often leave them on the bat. You can just cut under, you don't even have to use water, you can just cut under and then just take the whole bat off and then just get a new bat. Oh yeah. We do have, I'll see how many bats we have. If we're like on a bat shortage, we might not be able to, but typically that's fine. Any other questions? Okay, now we're going to do the bubble plate. This is also going to be the same set of techniques that you would use if you wanted to make like a chip and dip bowl, or if you wanted to make like a little bowl that had a little center thing like for like olives or cherries, and then you could put the pits in, or if you wanted to have like a little center thing that was like toothpicks, and you had like some little charcuterie items or something, and you like get them out.
That's what I was gonna ask you to make.
A charcuterie item?
Well, no.
Oh,
A little different typically.
oh perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
So just maybe stop there so you can actually
Yes, definitely.
so we can see that. But yeah, it'd be nice if you did.
Can you have some charcuterie for us, please?
I guess.
We're like,
I'm
I have
sure
other things.
Yeah.
I'm like, I do have 2 cheese sticks in my bag.
I did make their jam, so. Yeah.
Well, we did talk about having a dinner party or something, didn't we? Was that this class?
No.
No,
No,
it was
but
a
we
different
should
class.
have one.
People were like, let's all bring snacks one day, and I was like, I would not say no to that. Oh my god, there was this one class, there's this like angel of a human being that I know, and their partner was in the class. They've taken a class with me, and their partner was in the class, but they're a chef, and they would just send him with treats for the whole class, like every single week, and it was like the sweetest thing I've ever experienced in my life. Every week he would show up and be like, oh, look what we got this week. And it was like crazy things. It was like Thai iced tea mousse. It was like, yeah, I was like,
No.
you just made this for us. That's so nice. Okay, so similar to making a plate, I'll start this one once it's centered in like a kind of lower, flatter situation, but I will leave this one significantly thicker than if it was going to be a plate, because we're gonna need some of this clay for the bubble part of it. This is also the same way you would make like a donut vase, if anybody's seen those, like you can make like basically a hollow circle vase in the middle is cut out. So same kind of idea, you can just go through the whole way to the back. So I am going to open this up, and it's a little bit deeper than the plate obviously, but we still don't have a ton of depth to work with, so I'm not going to do a full kind of cut in to open the floor, but I'll kind of just drag this clay back towards myself. And depending if you're making like, you know, a chip and dip bowl, the first kind of part is what I've just done. So if you want that to be more narrow, you just wouldn't pull back as far on your first opening. So now that I've done this, this outside part is kind of split naturally into 2 pieces. We've got this part that's raised, and then this kind of part that's behind it. So I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna make a second opening behind it. And I'll just kind of like stick my finger in there. And create the second opening. So now you can start to see that there are kind of 2 sets of walls going on. And depending on what you want to make, that will help dictate how much clay you're allocating to each of the walls. For this kind of circle-based situation or bubble plate, I'll usually do about half for each. I'll just split it evenly, but again, if you were making like something that was like a little divot for like pits of some kind, you would just use a little bit of clay for that, and then the most of your clay for the second wall for the bowl piece of it. So now I'm going to treat these a little bit independently, and I'm going to do some one-handed pulls on each. So I can bring up this wall a little bit, and I'll come in and this wall as well. So now that these are looking decently tall, my goal is going to be to connect these walls with each other. So first, I am going to come in and get out any water that is in this in between. I'm gonna cut this in half anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But you wanna make sure that you get that really dry because it's gonna be fully sealed. You're definitely not gonna be able to get that out later on, and it will sometimes make a piece crack. So then I am going to try to get this outside wall to curve in a little bit. I don't want it to be too flared out when I'm trying to connect them. Now I'm going to take this wall and flare it into the other one. And this will sometimes be kind of like a push and pull situation, like you'll do a little bit on one and then kind of do a little bit on the other one until they finally get close enough that they will meet. Something like this. I'm first going to come over and just compress gently with my sponge, but then I'll also usually compress with a rib, either the metal rib or the wooden rib. Just kind of go over this seam. Mine is feeling a little bit thin. For this type of piece, it's better to have the place where they connect be a little bit thicker. Like often at the very tops of your piece, it's just a little bit thinner at the top. And if you can help it, it's nice for them to be a little bit thicker just so that the connection has some more clay. It's not like super thin at any point, because sometimes that will also crack. These guys are definitely like the most precarious of any item that I do in here. They can sometimes explode, so just also keep that in mind.
Like in the kiln.
Yeah. Then I'll kind of clean out the inside.
Do you pre-trim it?
Oh yeah, you could pre-trim it.
Could you trim it after?
Yeah, you can totally trim them. And yeah, if you wanted to do the, oh wow, that was really thick at the bottom. If you wanted to do the base situation, this is not what I should be doing. I don't know why I'm choosing to do this this way. This was like probably the worst route I could have gone every step of the way. Just on this interior situation. If you wanted to do the base situation, it will usually look something like this.
Wow.
And then what people will do is cut out a little thing on the top. So kind of like a circle up here, and then a circle on the inside, kind of in here where that matches, and then one down here. So that way, I don't know if this is going to be long enough, but you could imagine a little flower sticking in the base. And then you can either, when you trim it, kind of make sure there's like a flat place for it to sit, or you could like build like little feet on it or something like that. And these are also fun because you can see the inside. And basically just like a large macaroni. What was I gonna say about that? Oh, with this you can also, actually this wasn't too bad. You can see it a little bit more on here. You can see at the top that it's pretty thin, like where that thin spot is, where my two pieces connected. So that's just gonna be like a little bit weaker of a spot. And when you trim these, you can totally trim the outside and the inside if you've done the kind of vase situation, or you can, you know, do whatever with the plate. Does anyone have any questions? questions about that or have any additional items they would like to see? Feeling good? Great. I think that's all I got.
Okay.
Sweet.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Shall we?
We shall.
You should still trim first though.
Oh yeah, if you have stuff to trim, you can trim. If you don't want to trim first, you also don't have to. It's just usually easier to clean up. But kind of dealer's choice. I like to trim first, but
Yeah.
if you're like jonesing to throw something super